Captain Eli Drennan, one of the Terran Alliance's most experienced explorers, was ready for a straightforward mission to survey planet Vora 9, a mysterious, lush exoplanet on the far reaches of known space. As he approached the planet, he marveled at its vibrant colors from orbit. Dense green forests covered the surface, with ribbons of bright blue rivers winding through the terrain. Despite its exotic allure, little was known about the life forms or atmospheric conditions below. Eli had explored dozens of worlds, but this one was different, untouched, and tantalizingly wild. Alliance Command, this is Captain Drennan on final approach. Scanners indicate minor atmospheric disturbances, but nothing out of the ordinary, he reported, his voice steady. Copy that, Drennan. Stay sharp and keep us updated, came the calm response from command. Eli was confident. He'd been on countless missions like this one, and he had complete faith in his ship, the Endurance. Equipped with state-of-the-art tech, it was designed to withstand the harshest conditions any planet could throw at him. But as he began his descent through the atmosphere, something unexpected happened. The entire ship shuddered as his radar lit up, showing an unexpected and rapidly approaching asteroid cluster. Command, I've got an asteroid field. Requesting immediate dash, his message cut off as his ship was buffeted by fragments of rock, sending him into a violent spiral. Eli wrestled with the controls, desperately trying to stabilize the Endurance as alarms blared and warning lights flashed. He pushed the ship to its limits, adjusting the thrusters and deploying emergency stabilizers, but the damage was too severe. A particularly large fragment slammed into the side of his ship, sending it into a nosedive toward the planet's surface. His only option was to prepare for an emergency landing. Brace for impact, he shouted, though he was alone. The ground rushed up to meet him, and the last thing Eli remembered was a deafening crash and the feeling of being thrown forward as the Endurance collided with the alien landscape. When he regained consciousness, he was disoriented, his vision blurry as he lay sprawled across the ship's control panel. Pain radiated from his shoulder, and his head throbbed. Slowly, he sat up, assessing his injuries. His left arm was bruised, possibly fractured, and his face bore a shallow cut. Wiping the blood from his brow, he took a deep breath and surveyed the wreckage. The Endurance was a shell of its former self, the hull torn open and scattered across the jungle floor. Several key systems were fried, and the communications array was destroyed. The realization dawned on him: he was completely cut off, stranded on an unknown planet with no way to contact the Alliance. Eli shook off the dread creeping into his mind. Survival was his immediate priority. He quickly gathered his survival kit, checking his supplies: water rations, emergency food packs, a basic medical kit, and his multi-tool. With no way to call for help, he knew his only chance of rescue was to find a way to repair the ship or, failing that, to survive long enough for the Alliance to send a search team. As he stepped out of the wreckage, the alien landscape unfolded around him. Towering trees with thick, emerald leaves formed a dense canopy, and the air was filled with strange, soft noises: the distant calls of unseen creatures, the rustle of alien leaves, and a faint hum that seemed to resonate from the very ground beneath him. Eli's gaze settled on a nearby plant that glowed faintly, casting an eerie green light across his surroundings. The plant's colors shifted subtly as he approached, as if it were reacting to his presence. He set up a small perimeter around the crash site, marking his territory to avoid getting lost. But as he worked, he began noticing something unsettling. Along the soft, loamy ground were tracks: massive, clawed footprints sunk deep into the soil. The tracks were unlike anything he had encountered in his career, much larger than those of any known species on record. Eli crouched, studying the prints carefully. The creature that had made them had enormous claws and a wide gait, likely indicating a predator. Eli's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, though he knew it would be a meager defense against a creature this large. The thought of an encounter with whatever had made those prints unnerved him, but he pressed on, determined to focus on survival. He hoped that if he kept to himself, the creatures here would leave him alone. Night fell quickly, and with it, an intense darkness enveloped the jungle. Eli set up a small fire, knowing the light would keep some of the more curious creatures at bay. Yet the jungle remained alive with sounds. The hum he'd heard earlier intensified, blending with distant clicks and chirps that echoed through the trees. He tried to get some rest, but every rustle and distant howl set his nerves on edge. Hours into the night, Eli was awoken by a low, rumbling sound. He sat up, his heart pounding, peering into the darkness beyond his fire. The shadows moved strangely, shifting in unnatural ways, almost as if the trees themselves were alive and watching him. Then, he saw them eyes, reflecting his firelight from the shadows. Large, golden eyes, each set in a face covered in gleaming scales that shimmered faintly in the fire's glow. Eli froze, his mind racing. The creatures were massive, standing upright but bending unnaturally at their joints, with elongated limbs and claws that seemed to glint in the darkness. They remained at the edge of the firelight, silent and watchful, their eyes never leaving him. Eli felt a surge of primal fear, his instinct screaming at him to flee, but he knew any sudden movement could provoke an attack. Slowly, he raised his hands, hoping to signal that he meant no harm. The creatures didn't respond, but neither did they advance. They simply stood there, studying him with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. Eli held his breath, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. He had faced countless dangers in his career, but this was different. The creatures exuded an intelligence, a presence that suggested they were more than simple predators. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, it was impossible to tell. Finally, the creatures made a low, resonant hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate through Eli's bones. Then, as silently as they had appeared, they melted back into the shadows, leaving Eli alone by his dying fire. Eli sat there, stunned, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had no idea what the creatures wanted or why they had left him unharmed. But one thing was clear, he was not alone on Vora 9, and whatever these creatures were, they were watching him, waiting. As dawn broke, casting pale light across the alien landscape, Eli knew his mission had taken an unexpected turn. His crash had been the first challenge. Now, survival would depend on navigating the strange and potentially hostile intelligence lurking in the jungle shadows. The days after the crash passed in a blur of survival tasks and haunting encounters. Captain Eli Drennan's routine was simple: repair the ship's most critical systems, scout for food and water, and avoid the creatures that watched him from the shadows. Yet, as careful as he was, he couldn't escape the feeling of eyes on him every time he stepped beyond the perimeter he'd set up around his camp. The first sign that things were changing came one evening, just as dusk began to settle. Eli was setting up his solar charger to power a small distress beacon he had managed to salvage, rigging it with scraps from his ship. He had no idea if the beacon would even function, but it was his only hope of signaling for help. As he fumbled with the wiring, he noticed something odd, a strange, rhythmic sound echoing from the forest. It was a steady, pulsing beat, almost like drumming, deep and resonant, seemingly coming from all around him. Eli turned, scanning the trees, but nothing stirred. The sound continued, growing louder, reverberating through the ground, as though the forest itself was alive and humming with energy. He clutched his sidearm, his pulse quickening, unsure if he should stay put or prepare to flee. Then, emerging from the shadows, he saw them, the creatures he had encountered that first night. This time, there were more of them, perhaps a dozen, their golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They moved slowly, almost ritualistically, forming a loose circle around him, their movements synchronized with the pulsing sound. Eli's hand went instinctively to his weapon, but he held back, watching them with wary curiosity. The creatures were even more impressive up close. Their skin, which he thought was purely scaly, was interwoven with crystalline structures that glinted in the fading sunlight. The crystalline sections seemed to pulse with energy, casting faint, shifting colors as they moved. They weren't just watching him, they were studying him, as if he was as alien to them as they were to him. One of the creatures stepped forward, taller and more elaborately adorned than the others, with darker scales and crystalline ridges along its arms and chest. Its 6 golden eyes focused intently on Eli, and it raised a limb, extending a clawed hand toward him, almost as if it were reaching out. Eli took a deep breath, steadying himself. Slowly, he extended his own hand, mirroring the creature's gesture, though he stopped short of touching it. The creature tilted its head, letting out a series of clicks and hums, a language Eli couldn't understand, but that conveyed a strange sense of curiosity rather than hostility. "Hello," Eli whispered, feeling foolish but unable to think of anything else to say. "I come in peace. I won't harm you." The creature seemed to react, its eyes narrowing as if it was trying to interpret his words. It turned to the others, emitting a series of low, resonant sounds. The other creatures responded in kind, their hums blending into a deep, harmonious vibration that seemed to fill the air around them. Eli felt the sound in his bones, a strange sensation that left him dizzy but oddly calm. The leader creature took another step forward, bending down to pick up a small piece of metal from the ground, a shard from Eli's ship. It held the metal fragment up, inspecting it closely before offering it back to him. Eli accepted it, understanding the gesture. The creature was acknowledging his presence, perhaps even his crash, as if it recognized he was an outsider who hadn't come by choice. Then, without warning, the creature turned and began to walk away, motioning for Eli to follow. For a moment, he hesitated. He didn't know if he could trust them, but this was the first sign of intentional communication he'd seen, and he knew he couldn't pass up the chance. With one last glance back at his damaged ship, Eli took a deep breath and followed the creatures into the jungle. They led him through a maze of thick, towering trees, over streams that glowed faintly in the twilight, and past strange plants that recoiled as he brushed against them. The creatures moved silently, almost gliding over the ground, and Eli struggled to keep up. Despite his fear, he found himself marveling at the surreal beauty of the landscape. The deeper they went, the more the jungle seemed to hum with life, the very air thick with energy. After what felt like an hour of walking, they reached a clearing illuminated by a strange, pulsating light emanating from within a rocky hill. The creatures led him into the hill through a narrow opening, revealing a hidden cavern filled with glowing crystals that lined the walls and ceiling. The air inside was warm and filled with a faint, sweet scent that reminded Eli of honey. At the center of the cavern stood a circular stone altar, covered in etchings that pulsed faintly in time with the crystals. The leader approached the altar, gesturing for Eli to come closer. As he stepped forward, he noticed a collection of objects laid out on the stone, pieces of machinery, fragments of metal, and other items that looked like they might once have belonged to previous explorers or travelers. Some were clearly ancient, covered in moss and dirt, while others looked far more advanced than anything the Terran Alliance had developed. Eli realized with a jolt that this wasn't just a random collection of objects. These items had been left here over centuries, offerings, or remnants from other visitors to Vora 9. The creatures had gathered them, perhaps even revered them. They were protectors, curators of this strange treasure trove, and now they were showing it to him. The leader gestured to one of the objects, a piece of technology that looked like a scanner, but far more advanced than anything Eli had seen. It emitted a soft, blue light as he reached out to touch it, and as his fingers brushed against its surface, he felt a strange sensation, as if the device was trying to communicate with him. A flash of images filled his mind, visions of distant stars, galaxies, and other worlds, places he could barely comprehend. The experience was overwhelming, but also exhilarating. The creatures had shown him a glimpse of something far larger than himself, a glimpse into the mysteries of the universe. Suddenly, the vision faded, and Eli was back in the cavern, his heart pounding as he tried to process what he had seen. He looked up at the leader creature, who watched him with an expression that was almost expectant, as if it wanted to know what he had learned. Eli struggled to find words. You've encountered others, haven't you? Other travelers from the stars? The creature didn't respond in words, but its eyes seemed to shine with understanding. It raised a clawed hand, gesturing to the entrance of the cave, signaling that it was time for him to leave. The ritual, whatever it had been, was over. As Eli turned to go, the creature placed a small, crystalline object in his hand, a piece of the glowing crystal from the cavern. He held it tightly, sensing its significance, a symbol of trust, or perhaps a warning. As he left the cave, he glanced back one last time, meeting the creature's gaze. In that moment, he felt an unspoken bond, a sense of shared understanding. When he returned to his camp, Eli felt like a different man. The creatures were no longer just predators lurking in the jungle, they were guardians of something ancient, protectors of knowledge that spanned the stars. The encounters had changed him, but he still had questions. What did the visions mean? And why had they chosen to share their secrets with him? As he settled by the dying embers of his campfire, Eli realized he was no longer just a stranded explorer. He was a witness to something far greater, and somehow, he sensed that his journey on Vora 9 was only beginning. The following days were marked by an uneasy truce between Captain Eli Drennan and the alien creatures. Each morning, he awoke to find them watching him from a distance, observing his every move with a quiet, almost ritualistic reverence. They seemed less like predators now and more like sentinels, guardians of some ancient purpose. Eli knew they were testing him, assessing his behavior, his intentions. But for what? Driven by a need to survive and an insatiable curiosity about these strange beings, Eli began working to decipher their patterns. He spent hours studying their movements, observing how they interacted with each other and with the environment. The creatures clearly had a hierarchy. The leader, adorned with darker, more crystalline scales, was the only one who ever approached him directly. The others followed its cues, watching and imitating it almost like a ritual. But there was something else, something Eli couldn't quite grasp, a language of gestures and sounds, subtle vibrations he could feel rather than hear. In the evenings, the creatures left small offerings near his camp, fruit, roots, and water from streams he hadn't yet discovered. It was as if they understood his need for sustenance and were showing him which resources on their world were safe. Each time he accepted their gifts, the creatures observed with a focused intensity, humming softly as he ate or drank, as if taking note of his every reaction. Eli felt like a participant in some alien trial, though he had no idea what it was or what passing it might entail. One night, as he sat by his campfire, the leader creature appeared once more, carrying an object wrapped in leaves. The creature approached him slowly, its golden eyes fixed on his, and extended the bundle toward him. Eli hesitated, then reached out, carefully unwrapping the leaves to reveal a piece of technology, something ancient, alien, and beautifully intricate. It was a small device, covered in strange symbols and faintly humming with energy. Eli recognized the unmistakable shape of a data storage unit. He glanced at the creature, who was watching him with a look that was almost expectant. Eli had seen similar tech before, but this was far older, perhaps hundreds or even thousands of years beyond anything in Terran records. He was struck by the realization that the creatures had been exposed to advanced technology long before his arrival. How much had they learned from it? And what were they hoping to learn from him? Eli powered up the device using a portable energy cell, and to his astonishment, it activated with a soft glow. Holographic symbols flickered above the device, forming a series of shapes and patterns he couldn't recognize. As he watched, the symbols began shifting, arranging themselves into sequences that seemed almost instructional. It was a code, a test to see if he could understand and engage with their knowledge. Eli's mind raced. He had encountered alien languages before, but this was different. It was as if the symbols were shifting to match his thought patterns, adapting to him. He began by touching a symbol that seemed to resemble an energy source, and in response, a new sequence appeared, followed by faint projections of machinery, plants, and what he assumed were symbols for peace and cooperation. He understood then, the device was guiding him, testing his responses to various scenarios. Hours passed as he interacted with the device, his responses and choices recorded, studied, and he could feel it judged. The creatures watched silently, observing how he solved each new puzzle, how he chose peace over aggression, curiosity over fear. Eli could sense that the choices he made were critical, that each response was being weighed and evaluated. Finally, as he completed the last sequence, the device powered down. The leader creature let out a low hum, a sound that vibrated through Eli's bones, resonating with an intensity that conveyed approval. The other creatures joined in, creating a haunting, harmonious song that filled the night air. Eli felt a wave of relief and satisfaction, but also a deep sense of reverence. He had passed the test, though he still didn't fully understand what it had been for. Just as he was beginning to relax, the leader creature motioned for him to follow once more. It led him through the jungle, deeper than he had ever ventured before, until they reached another hidden cavern, this one illuminated by the faint glow of bioluminescent plants. At the center of the cavern was a pool of shimmering liquid, surrounded by carvings etched into the stone, intricate symbols that seemed to tell a story. The leader gestured to the pool, its meaning clear. Eli was to approach. He knelt by the edge of the water, peering into its depths. The liquid was unlike anything he had seen, smooth, metallic, yet translucent, rippling with colors that shifted and swirled. It was mesmerizing. As he gazed into the pool, images began to form on its surface, scenes of a time long past. He saw alien ships descending onto Vora 9, advanced beings in strange armor who walked among the creatures, sharing knowledge, technologies, and rituals. He saw moments of harmony, but also flashes of conflict and violence, as some of the visitors sought to exploit the planet's resources, leading to a bitter struggle. The creatures had fought to protect their world, and in the end, the visitors had been driven away. The remnants of their technology had been left behind, hidden in the caverns, preserved by the creatures as a reminder of the past. Eli's heart ached with understanding. The creatures had been left wary, protective of their knowledge and their home, yet willing to trust again if a visitor showed wisdom and respect. They had shared their history with him, a history written in blood and resilience. The vision faded, and the pool returned to its shimmering, metallic calm. Eli looked up at the leader, who regarded him with an intensity that left no doubt. He was now a part of their story, a custodian of their truth. The leader reached out, placing a single, crystalline shard into his hand, a symbol of trust, a piece of their history. Eli accepted it, understanding the significance. This was more than a gift, it was an invitation, a promise. He was now bound to their world, trusted to protect its secrets and, perhaps, to help bridge the gap between their species. As they made their way back to his camp, Eli felt a profound change within himself. He had come to Vora 9 as an explorer, but he would leave as something else, a guardian, a friend, a witness to the enduring strength of these creatures. That night, as he lay by his fire, cradling the crystal shard, he understood that he had been given a rare gift, a glimpse into the heart of a people who had suffered, fought, and survived. And in return, he had earned their trust. Days turned into weeks, and Captain Eli Drennan's life became a blend of survival, discovery, and growing camaraderie with the alien creatures. The leader, whom he'd mentally nicknamed Obsidian due to its dark, crystalline scales, continued to visit him, often bringing other members of the group who watched him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something bordering on reverence. He felt less like a stranger and more like a part of their world, connected by the trust he'd earned. With the knowledge he'd gained from the ancient device and the shards from the cavern, Eli made substantial progress on his distress beacon. The crystal shard the creatures had gifted him held more power than he'd anticipated, acting as a powerful energy source that allowed his beacon to send a clear, steady signal far beyond Vora 9's atmosphere. He tested it cautiously, mindful of the responsibility he bore not only for himself but for the alien species that had shown him their hidden truths. If anyone responded to his signal, they might come with intentions far different from his own. As he activated the beacon, a faint worry gnawed at him. Obsidian and the other creatures had retreated into the jungle, their forms blending into the shadows, watching him with a tense silence. Eli sensed that they understood the implications of his signal, that they feared what might come with it. He wished he could reassure them, but his only hope was that he could control the outcome, that his Terran superiors would respect the boundaries of Vora 9. After all, his report would be key in determining the Alliance's stance on the planet. He didn't have to wait long. Within hours, a familiar sound filled the air, the low hum of a Terran shuttle descending through the atmosphere. Eli felt a wave of relief and trepidation. His distress call had been answered, but he knew that once they arrived, Vora 9's peaceful seclusion would be over. The shuttle landed in a clearing near his makeshift camp, and a small team disembarked, dressed in standard Terran exploration suits. They looked at him with surprise and concern. Eli had clearly been through an ordeal. His face was worn, his clothes torn, and his gaze held a depth they weren't accustomed to seeing. "Captain Drennan," called out Lieutenant Mara Valen, a longtime colleague who had led the rescue mission. "Are you all right? Command received your signal and sent us immediately." "I'm fine, Lieutenant." "More than fine, actually," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But there's something important here. Things we don't fully understand." He glanced over his shoulder, where he saw Obsidian and several other creatures lurking just beyond the tree line, their eyes catching the sunlight. Mara followed his gaze, her eyes widening as she spotted the aliens. She reached instinctively for her sidearm, but Eli raised his hand to stop her. "No, Mara," he said firmly. "They're not hostile. They've been watching over me, helping me. This is their world, and they've allowed me to be here." The other Terran soldiers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of wariness and confusion. Eli knew it would take time for them to understand, and he also knew that he had only a limited window to convince them of the creature's peaceful nature. If they returned to the Alliance with a report of an uninhabited world ripe for exploration, Vora 9 would be overrun. The creature's history of betrayal would be repeated. Eli motioned for Obsidian to come forward, hoping to establish a moment of trust. After a moment's hesitation, Obsidian stepped into the clearing, the sunlight casting shimmering patterns across its crystalline scales. The soldiers stiffened, but Eli held up a reassuring hand. "Obsidian," Eli said softly, nodding to the creature. "These people they're my kin. Like you, they came to help." Obsidian tilted its head, its golden eyes scanning the Terran soldiers with an unreadable expression. Then, to Eli's relief, it extended one of its elongated limbs toward them, claws held back in a gesture that echoed Eli's original greeting. Eli could see the tension in Mara's face, but she took a cautious step forward, mimicking Obsidian's gesture by reaching out with her hand. For a moment, human and alien touched, and a mutual understanding flickered between them. Mara turned to Eli, her expression softening. "Captain, I don't know what you found here, but it's extraordinary." "Yes," Eli replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But it's also fragile. These creatures, they've been harmed before, by others like us. They trusted me, Mara. We can't betray that trust." He spent the next hour with his team, explaining everything he had learned, from the creature's ancient history to their cautious acceptance of him. He described the visions he had seen in the pool, the remnants of past conflicts, and the responsibility he now bore to protect their world. Mara listened intently, her usual skepticism softened by the clear sincerity in Eli's voice. As he finished, she took a deep breath, her gaze turning thoughtful. "If what you're saying is true, we need to make sure the Alliance respects this world. But you know how they are, Eli. The pull of discovery, of resources, it's strong." "I know," he replied. "But we have to try. Mark it as a restricted zone, a sanctuary. It's the least we can do." Mara nodded, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I'll support you, Captain. We'll make our case to command. They trust you, and if you say these creatures deserve peace, they'll listen." Eli felt a wave of relief, though he knew that this was just the beginning. The Alliance might heed his request, but there would always be those driven by greed and ambition. Still, he had done everything he could to protect Vora 9 and its guardians. As they prepared to depart, Eli turned back to Obsidian, who stood silently at the edge of the clearing. He walked over, placing the crystalline shard the creature had given him in its hand. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'll remember my promise." Obsidian regarded him for a long moment, then placed the shard back in his hand, a silent insistence that he should keep it. Eli nodded, understanding. It was a reminder of his bond with Vora 9, a symbol of the trust that now connected their worlds. When he boarded the shuttle, Eli felt a bittersweet pang. He had survived, he was returning home, but he was leaving a part of himself behind on Vora 9. As the shuttle ascended, he looked out the window, watching the alien jungle fade into a sea of green. The creatures watched his departure, their eyes glowing faintly, and he hoped that one day, humanity would be worthy of the trust they had shown him. As the stars opened up before him, Eli made a silent vow. He would protect Vora 9, no matter the cost. It was a promise he intended to keep.